Hello, my grammar pals, and welcome to the English Weekly Review Session 1, where we'll be going over the parts of speech and some basic grammar. My name is Addi Fowler, and I'm an English and Humanities and a little bit of science tutor here at the RVCC Tutoring Center, so let's get into it. In case you haven't come and visited us before, we are located at the Bateman. I have my little clicker over it, the Bateman Student Center on the 3rd level on the RVCC campus in North Branch, New Jersey. You can schedule an appointment with us in person or view virtually through the link here, which is Academia, which is our scheduling service. You can also call 908-526-1200 at the extension of 8549 or 8393. We love walk-ins, we love appointments, whatever works for you, we'll work around it and we'll make sure you get the help you need. So what are we going to go over in today's weekly review session? Today we're going to go over what are the parts of speech, what are nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, and basic grammar. And at the end, we're going to test your knowledge of each of these components that we'll be learning in the presentation today. So first we're going to start off with the parts of speech. When you were younger, chances are you probably played with building blocks, building words together with the letter blocks and learning language in a different perspective. Well, that concept doesn't stop the older you get. The parts of speech are your building blocks of language. There are 8 of them, which are nouns, pronouns, prepositions, adjectives, adverbs, and then there's, I think, 2 other ones. The important part to remember about the parts of speech are they are the components that make up a sentence, and they help and convey what you're trying to say in a sentence. So those are your parts of speech. They're your building blocks for language. Now we'll start with our first part of speech, our first building block for today, which is a noun. A noun is a person, place, idea, or thing. They can function as subjects, objects, complements, modifiers, or positives. We'll go into that more as we go into subject and word order of a sentence. All you need to worry about right now is that a noun is a person, place, thing, or idea. Those are the main things to remember about a noun. Next are verbs. Verbs are actions. They're things that show what the subject, or otherwise the noun, is doing. They can have different forms depending on the tense, mood, voice, number, and person. So an example of this is run. You wouldn't say, I run to the store. You would say, I ran to the store. So that's an example of a different tense. Different mood would be, I ran to the store versus I ran to the store. So a verb implements the tone and the mood of a sentence while also conveying the action. Next, we're going to move on to pronouns. Now, thankfully, in today's culture, we have a little more of an understanding of what pronouns are due to the LGBTQIA association, which makes this subject much easier. However, most people in today's world only know personal pronouns, which are I, we, you, they, he, she, and it. So that's displayed over here in the personal pronouns. Now, there are different cases, which is the different ways we use pronouns, personal pronouns, for example. So I'll give you an instance of this. Would you say, I and Miranda, or Miranda and I went to the park? No. The reason we wouldn't say this is because if we took Miranda and I went to the park, okay, that makes sense. So that wasn't really a best example, but the point is you're supposed to use different cases of pronouns depending on the sentence or the situation. Next, we have demonstrative pronouns. They're used to show or identify as this thing says, used to show or identify one or a number of nouns that may be far or near in distance of time. So an example of this would be, this cat went on a walk. The demonstrative pronoun would be this. An interrogative pronoun is used to ask questions about a person or object that we don't know about. They're interrogating. So interrogating means questioning. So a lot of the times when you see these pronouns, they're questioning something. Who is that? So in that one, we have 2 pronouns because we have an interrogative pronoun, which is questioning that, which is a demonstrative pronoun. So it's an example of a demonstrative and an interrogative pronoun. Next, we have relative pronouns, which are used to join or relate two different clauses, which are two different independent parts of a sentence together by referring to the noun in the previous clause using the pronouns. So, to whom it may concern. That's an example of a relative pronoun. An indefinite pronoun is used to show unspecified objects or people, whether in plural or in singular. So these are similar to the interrogative pronouns in that we're questioning something, but it's not usually going to be used in a question sentence. So someone is hiding behind the bush. We don't know who is hiding behind the bush. We just know a person is hiding behind the bush, which is why we would use someone. But we could also switch out someone and change the tone of the sentence to be an interrogative sentence to say, who is hiding behind the bush? They both convey the same idea that we don't know who is hiding behind the bush, but they change what type of sentence it is and the tone of the sentence. So next are the ones you're not really going to have to worry about too much in proper writing, but they're still important, which are reflexive and intensive pronouns. They indicate a noun that has been used in an earlier part of the sentence. So an example of that would be, I went by myself to the park. We're saying by myself, which is myself is your reflexive or intensive pronoun, to refer to I, which was in the earlier part of the sentence, which, if you look at it, is also a personal pronoun. The reciprocal pronouns I have never really used that much. They're more used in talking versus writing. Next, we're going to move on to adjectives. Adjectives are my favorite part of speech because they describe nouns or a pronoun. So they usually give a little more information about the noun that's not provided in the noun, such as the size, color, shape, number, quality, or condition of the pronoun or noun. Like they say in this example, she wore a red dress. The adjective would be red because it's clarifying what color the dress is. So another example of this would be the big dog ran down the long street. Your adjectives in that sentence would be big and long because they're describing the dog and they're describing the street. So adjectives are pretty easy because they're these words that just show some sort of description somehow. So those are the 4 parts of speech that we have gone over for week 1. Next week we'll be going over the next 4 parts of speech, and the parts of speech will be completed then. Next, we're going to move on to sentence and word order. So sentence and word order may not sound like they're that important, but whenever you learn a language, it's going to be very important, especially in English, because English is one of the only languages in the world that goes by a subject-verb-object order, also known as SVO. It means that the person or the thing, otherwise known as the noun, the subject comes first, followed by the action, the verb, and then the person or thing that receives the action, which is the object. So an object can be a noun or a pronoun. So an example is she loves him. She would be the subject, love would be the verb, and him would be the object. Now, if you look in this example, him is a personal pronoun. There we go. That makes sense, right? He gave his sister a book. So this is going to be a little harder to figure out the parts of, but let's break it down. He is going to be your subject because it's right before the verb. Chances are a lot of the time your subject is going to be right before your verb. So he would be your subject, gave would be your verb, and then sister 9 out of 10 times is probably going to be your indirect object as it says. So indirectly, the sister is receiving the book, which is the object. The way you can tell between indirect and direct objects is you can take the indirect object out of the sentence and it'll still make sense. He gave a book. Okay, we don't know who he gave a book to, but we know he gave a book. So that makes sense. The indirect object is just to specify possession in this case. So next we're going to move on to punctuation. I see a lot of people struggling with punctuation here in the tutoring center, which is why I thought it would be a very important thing to involve in this presentations that I have weekly. So we're going to go through each and every single one of these punctuation marks that's on this little chart, which is a great little chart to use if you're ever writing a paper and you're confused. So let's go through each one. So a period is used at the end of a sentence. Now we're going to go over this next week. Probably I should have gone over it this week, but we'll still go over it next week of the different types of sentences. There are 4 types of different sentences, 2 of which you're always going to use a period for. The 2 of which you're always going to use a period for are declarative and imperative sentences. A declarative sentence is doing what it sounds like. It's declaring something. I gave my dog a treat. I'm declaring that I gave my dog a treat. An imperative sentence usually is giving an order. Now, the tricky thing about imperative sentences is they can also have an exclamation mark depending on the tone of the sentence. So, let's just quickly go over this again. A period is used for an imperative or a declarative sentence. Declarative, declare something. Imperative is an order. Next, we're going to move on to a question mark. A question mark is used at the end of a question. Did you go and get some milk? We would put a question mark at the end of that because it's questioning something. A lot of the time, declarative sentences can be changed into interrogative. See, interrogative is a type of name for a question sentence. So we can change from a declarative to an interrogative question very easily by just changing the period to a question mark. So next is my favorite punctuation mark, which is a colon, and it's used to separate items on a list. So the very important part about colons is you usually want to have the word following before it. It implies that a colon is needed versus just going right into your list. Usually you also want to use colons to separate items on a list if they're little clauses or little statements. So if I say, the dog who had a tree, the dog who was wearing an outfit, that was when I would use a colon versus an outfit, a tree. Then I would just probably use a comma. So next we're going to move on to quotation marks, which chances are you're going to use a lot of the time in a proper English paper. So when you're directing something that an author has said, you have to put a quotation mark around this. This is to imply that these are not your own words, but these are somebody else's words. Next is brackets. You're rarely going to use brackets, but they're still important to know. They're usually also in English papers used to provide the information about an author. So we're going to say what the author said in quotation marks, and we're going to use the brackets to say what the author's last name and everything is, to imply the information about the author. Next is a comma. Commas are a tricky thing. It takes a lot of experience to get used to using them, but they're not something that we should be afraid of. A comma is used to indicate when we're taking a break within a sentence. So a lot of the time what I always say to my students is, read your sentences out loud, and wherever you're pausing to take a breath is where a comma should go. It is also used to separate items on a list, however, that is just if there's words, like I was explaining with the colons. Next, we're going to move on to a semicolon, which is used to separate 2 independent clauses. So if I said, Mark went to go get his dog, then Marie went to go get her dog. You would probably want to put a semicolon in between those 2. Next is an exclamation mark, which is used for expression when you're making a declaration, which are exclamatory sentences. They're usually something out of fear or something out of excitement. Next is a hyphen, which is used to join 2 adjectives before a noun. That's also interchangeable with a comma. So hyphen is important to know, but it's not critical. An ellipse is something you will never use in proper English writing, but it's used to signify missing text, or if the text is too long, you'll put an ellipsis, which is just simply 3 periods in a row. So next, we're going to move on to some practice. Give me 1 second while I pull up a timer for this. So first we're going to practice with nouns, which remember are a person, place, idea, or thing. So I'm going to give you about 5 seconds, or 10 seconds, I'll give you 10 seconds to try to guess the nouns within these sentences. Did you figure out the nouns within the sentences? Let's go over it quickly. In the first sentence, people get most of their news about the world through the mass media, that is, through radio, television, the internet, newspapers, and magazines. Your nouns are going to be people, news, world, media, radio, television, internet, newspapers, and magazines. For the second sentence, Cameron Green scored 52 of 21 balls, not off. I apologize for that typo. You're going to say the nouns are Cameron Green, 52, 21, and balls. For the third sentence, the nouns are studies, men, information, and woman. For the fourth sentence, discoveries, day, laboratories, and world. For the fifth sentence, the nouns are farmer, cart, boxes, vegetables, and market. And for the last sentence, the nouns are cart and oxen. So let's move on. Now we're going to do 10 seconds of practice with verbs. These are the same sentences, so hopefully it's going to be a little easier to find the verbs. Now I'll get your 10 seconds started right now. Did you figure out the verbs within these sentences? Let's go over it. So get would be a verb in the first sentence, and your other verb is. There are certain verbs which don't necessarily insinuate action, but also connect to nouns. So those would be your verbs for the first sentence. For the second sentence, your verbs are going to be scored. The third is going to be are. That's all. Are in process, sorry, are going to be your verbs in that sentence. In your fourth sentence, your verbs are going to be are made. That's going to be your verbs. For the fifth sentence, your verbs are going to be loaded and take. And for the sixth sentence, your verb is going to be was pulled. Now we're going to do 10 seconds of practice with your pronouns. I'll be starting your 10 seconds right now. Did you figure out the pronouns within these sentences? Let's go over them. So your first sentence, she and him, are going to be your pronouns. Now, extra kudos to you if you figured out that she is your subject, loves is your verb, and him is your object. For the second sentence, your pronouns are going to be this, my, and yours. For the third sentence, who is going to be your pronoun. For the fourth sentence, you is going to be your pronoun. For the fifth sentence, he and himself are going to be your pronouns. And for the sixth sentence, someone is going to be your pronoun. Now let's do 10 seconds of practice with adjectives. I'll be starting the timer right now. Did you figure out the adjectives within this sentence? The adjectives in this sentence are beautiful, smarter, fastest, red, most intelligent, and more active. Let's move on to sentence order. So remember, our sentence order is subject, verb, and object within the following sentence. So I'm going to start your 10 seconds right about now. Did you figure out the sentence order of these sentences? Let's go from the bottom up, since these are a little bit of easier ones. Your subject is cart, your verb is was, pulled, and then your object are oxen. So another way to tell about subject, verb, and object is you can pull them out and it makes sense. You understand the point of the sentence. So cart was pulled, oxen. You can figure out the cart was pulled by the oxen. Your subject, verb, and objects in this sentence are farmer, loaded, and cart. As for this sentence, it's going to be discoveries, are made, and day. In this sentence, it's going to be studies, are showing, men, or not studies, or studies are showing information. I apologize. Your subject, verb, object in this sentence are going to be Cameron Green scored balls. For the first sentence, your subject, verb order is going to be people get news. And then a lot of your objects could also be media, radio, television, internet, newspapers, and magazines. That could be a way to view that, but next week we'll go over why it's not that. Now for our last bit, we're going to do practice with punctuation. So I'll start your 10-second timer right now. Did you figure out the punctuation in the following sentences? In the first sentence, we have a few commas and a period, and we also have a colon. In the second sentence, we have an exclamation mark. In the third sentence, a period. In the fourth sentence, another period. In the fifth sentence, we have a period, and in the sixth, a question mark. So thank you very much for listening in on this first English Weekly Review session. Remember to return next week. We'll be having Jill do the presentation next week. We'll be covering the rest of the 8 parts of speech, more basic grammar such as the different types of sentences and clauses, and we'll also be doing more practice. If you can come in, we're doing it in person on Wednesdays 1 o'clock to 2:20. And if not, you can always watch the videos which will be posted sometime afterward on the same day. I hope you all are having a great week, and I hope you understand grammar a little bit more. I'll see you all next week, Grammar Pals.